Good morning. We are talking about brand messaging today and specifically like how to create obsession worthy brand messaging. And what does that mean? Well, obsession worthy brand messaging is really what makes you stand out to your customers and what makes your branding just have people taking a step back, looking at you and saying, wow, these guys are smart, they're slick, they're snappy, I love what they're doing, and they know what you're doing from right away and they want to work with you. They're lined up to work with you. So a couple of brands that do this really well are like Who Gives a Crap, Pori, in terms of like product driven brands. And then there's so many amazing entrepreneurs who do this also well. In the B2B world, it is often a little bit more specific, meaning that you need to be able to speak directly to what your audience wants to hear. So I want to give you some food for thought today in that if I ask you to describe your brand messaging or your brand voice, could you do it? And I'm not necessarily talking about, something short and snappy that's your tagline. I want you to be able to communicate to me what you do and how you would talk about your company. And if you can do that in a few short, sweet words, then the key is that you've probably spent some time thinking about your brand messaging. On the other hand, if you have not devoted some time to figuring out your brand messaging, it probably means that you either have not dived into who your audience is or you have not really thought about how you talk about things. And I want to stop before we go too much further and say that's perfectly normal. It's perfectly okay. I have worked with companies who've been around for 10 years and have never been through a brand messaging exercise, multi-million dollar companies. I have also worked with companies that are, not even cracking six figures yet, who have spot on brand messaging because they put the time in. So I think it's vital for wherever you are in your business, whether you're starting out, whether you're like sinking into who you really want to be and who you're growing into as a company, or whether you've been around for a while, to take some time to figure this out. Here's why. When you have clear, concise brand messaging, it gives you a really consistent customer experience because everyone on your team is talking about things in the same way. Whether your team consists of one, whether your team consists of 2 or 300. And the larger the team, the larger your business, the more important it is to get everyone on the same page that you're speaking about things, again, consistently. Because if marketing's talking about things one way, sales is talking about things a different way, and service or ops is talking about things yet another way, then you have a disconnect and you may end up with a confused audience. And that's the last thing that you want as a company. You want an audience who is, even if they're not obsessed with you, right? You want an audience who understands what you do, has clear expectations about the experience, and feels like that whatever the one hand is promising, the other hand is delivering. It like should come through at every single level of your company, which sounds like a tall order. And it can be, to be extremely, extremely clear. Um, but it doesn't have to be because there are people out there who specialize in this. Um, Hello, I'm Erin. Nice to meet you. With that in mind, there's a couple of other things that really well done brand messaging does. Is it sets you apart as a company, but it also blends who you want to be in the world. Think of it as a Venn diagram. Everything that's important to you about your company, everything that's important to the company in terms of as the company as a persona, and everything that matters to your audience. So if you think of it as a Venn diagram, this is what matters to your audience's problems. This is what matters to your company, what you do, how you deliver, and where they intersect in the middle. That's where your brand messaging really needs to live. So to create this obsession level, again, whether it's obsession level, whether it's just extremely clear communications, it's all about finding that middle piece that bridges the gap between your audience and your company so that you are speaking to them clearly. They understand what they're getting out of your company. And again, back to the example, marketing, sales, and operations are not just united, but they're united around what your customer wants. So what are some tips for doing this? First, go through a brand messaging exercise. I do this all the time, whether it's in one-day workshops or in a more long-term scenario where we're going through this. We're thinking through all of the things that matter to your company. We're evaluating the sales and marketing alignment. We're looking at this whole picture, right, to figure out what this looks like. What is the current landscape of your company? Where are the disconnects? Then, once we've got that, we figure out where you want to be and we compare that with customer research. And that customer research could look like a couple of different things. Very often, it's a blend of customer interviews, it's a blend of mining reviews and testimonials, not just of yourself, but of your competitors to find out what the opportunities and gaps are, not just in your company, but in the industry, to find out where you can really elevate yourself and stand out. So that's one of the ways that I think is really important. So the next step would be to simplify your language. So take a look. What kind of industry jargon is in there? And the more jargon heavy this is, the less digestible it's going to be. So no matter, yes, and if it's your client's jargon, that's one thing, but don't use it so that you're just using the jargon. Make sure to explain it in multiple ways, because even if the decision makers are at the top, you also have to attract people who might be doing the research for them, who may be doing some of these other pieces, because there are multiple influencers in the decision-making process, particularly at the B2B level, but even in smaller businesses as well, because you may have assistants, you may have a number of people doing some research, and you want to make sure that you're speaking to them too. So we don't want to alienate them if it's just the language of the decision makers. So you want to make sure that you're using a blend. You want to keep your sentences short and straightforward. And I want you to read everything that you're writing out loud, because it's one thing to write it. It is a whole different thing to hear how it actually sounds when you say it. And so does it pass the single breath test? Maybe it will, maybe it won't. But when you simplify your language, when you make it accessible, when you make it skimmable and enjoyable, and my friend and the cat are both here to say hello. She says hello. So when you make it accessible, thanks, Suni. Mwah. Hi. When you make it accessible, you are more likely to, have more and more people who are interested in hearing this. So a couple of examples might look like, if you had like, our solution leverages innovative technologies to facilitate streamless digital transformations. First, you may be going like, what? And you may have to read it a couple of times. But if you say instead something like, we use the latest tech to make your move to digital smooth and stress-free, that's another way to look at it. Or we could flip it even to be more customer-centric language, to be like, make your move to digital smooth and stress-free with our tech support or with our tech stack or whatever that means. So you're making it your customer focused. The next thing is to consider all the ways that you can make this message consistent. Maybe this means a one-pager of like a say this, not that document. Maybe you're just codifying common language pieces, and then you'll add to it. Your brand Bible or your brand messaging doc or whatever you want to call it, brand messaging guide, should include an overview of what some of these key messages are. Maybe you are, just coming up with common objections, common problems, and then ways that you would speak to them. That's another way to do it. Maybe you're talking about your mission, your vision, your core values. And then your brand voice is how you look at those core values. So it gives you is what we're saying, does it fall into this lens? Does this lens offer insights into this? So it should speak to core messages, brand voice, personality, anything that makes your brand come to life. And if there's a couple of statements that are spot on for the way that you talk about what you do, then I absolutely want you to think about ways that you can bring that in. And you want to use that not just as a lens for the things that you're saying, but you want to review what you're putting out against it. Secondly, and not just what you're putting out, what you're talking about in a sales conversation, like everything you publish, does it pass the sniff test? Is this what you want to be known for? Does this speak to these long-term, large picture goals? And if you don't know what those goals are, then go back to the first exercise where you're figuring out how you're different, what your brand means, what your customers want, how you meet in that middle of the Venn diagram, and then, revisit everything, because you have to figure out what these goals are. Um, there's a lot of things that I could talk about regarding to this, related to this. But the last piece is that know that this brand Bible, so to speak, can be, and should be a living document. And here's why. When your brand is clear, consistent, and never changes, it's like your brand exists in a vacuum. But your brand, your company, your customers, none of it exists in a vacuum, because the world is continually changing. So once every 6 to 12 months, probably the bigger your company goes, the longer the interval is. But every 12 months or so, review your brand messaging and make sure that it's actually speaking to, and when I say the brand messaging, specifically the brand messaging guide, make sure that it speaks to the current economy. When you have massive dynamic economic shifts or reality shifts, hello pandemic, hello banking crisis, all of these things, the way that you serve your audience and talk about the problems may also shift. So make sure that your brand guide is current, or if it's a short-term adaptation, figure out how you're going to adapt the messaging for short-term. So there's a lot of ways that we could talk about that. But before we get into this, because I want to be conscious of time, the third idea is to don't be afraid to be different. Yes, you want to know what your competitors are doing. And in some industries, it's simply not all that groundbreaking how you deliver, because maybe there's a lot of competition based on it. But how are you going to stand out? What does that look like? So, what is your USP? What makes you different? What's your unique mechanism? What makes you, whether it's you, an entrepreneur, or you, your company, what makes you stand out? And the bolder you can be, the more that's going to really come across in your conversation. So, talk about things, be conscious of how you talk about things. And if you're not sure what people respond to, pay attention, test some different ideas out there and see how people respond. Try some different links. If you're trying one varied link, you might say, we sell high quality skin products. That's pretty bland and generic, but it could also be extremely too. But if instead you're talking about, we're on a mission to shake up the skin care industry with our all natural, cruelty free, and sustainable products. Yeah, that's not as short and sweet, but that's a heck of a lot more engaging. It makes people really interested in finding out why you. What are you going to say? Why are they going to start obsessing about your brand? Because you stand for something more. You stand for something not necessarily alternative, but something better. You're on a mission to do something better. So there are lots of ways that you can work to create this killer brand message. So that's really magnetic and creates obsession, like brand obsessed customers, instead of, you also want to be a customer obsessed brand, but that's a whole different topic. So let's discuss this further at any given time. You can always reach out to me via DM. You can also head on over to my website, which is erinpennings.com, which is, you can see my name here on your screen. So thank you again. I hope to chat with you further. Next week, we'll be talking about something else related to brand messaging. Have a wonderful week.